How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, they're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hello and welcome to DNA Today. I'm your host, Kira Deneen. DNA Today informs you on what's happening in the genetic world. We're talking news stories, lessons, all to keep you updated and educated on the ever-changing world of genetics. 11:30 a.m. live on Mondays on whus.org or the radio 91.7 FM if you're around UConn's campus. And today I'm discussing the book Here is a Human Being at the Dawn of Personal Genomics by Misha Angist. And the author takes you through his experience as the fourth subject in the Personal Genome Project, which is George Church's ambitious plan at the time to sequence the entire genomic catalog. So this is every participant's 20,000 plus genes and the rest of her 6 billion base pairs. So this is to unlock the secrets of our genome and open the doors to understanding why we are the way we are and potentially fixing what ails us. So from cancer to diabetes to obesity, to male pattern baldness, all of these things we know have a genetic component, and one of the objectives of the Personal Genome Project is to learn more about this and learn more about the correlations between genes and genotypes. Of genotypes to phenotypes. So what's in our genes and how that's expressed and how that's influencing our physical beingness. But what exactly happened to this information? Will it be a boon or just another marketing tool? It poses the issues of what it means to be a public genome in a world where privacy is already under scrutiny and all of that. So for this book, little genetic knowledge is needed to read and understand and learn what's happening. There are portions of the book that Angist will explain concepts to the reader, but if you kind of already know how it works, it's pretty easy to skim through it. And the book isn't overly loaded with lessons. Most of the book focuses on his journey of learning the secrets revealed in his genome. So it's not so much throwing information at you, but it takes you on his kind of adventure of going from committing to being a participant, one of 10 of the first participants, to learning about what comes out of his genome, what they learned, and the implications that could have. So what mutations did he have? Could these mutations been passed on to his 2 daughters? Could these mutations be predictors of cancer yet to develop or other diseases yet to be diagnosed? There's a lot of unknowns that he learns more about. Nothing is definitive, but there are statistics. So, maybe he's at higher risk for something and lower risk for other things, and finding this out through sequencing his genome. So how exactly did he get his genome sequenced? What company did he go through? How much did it cost him? Well, it didn't cost him anything. As mentioned earlier, he was specially chosen to be a participant in the Personalized Genome Project led by George Church. And this project initial goal, in Angist's words, to quote him, to recapitulate the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project was the effort by both the government and private sector scientists to decide the entire complement of human DNA. And they did just that by February 2001, and the Personalized Genome Project took this as a step forward by selecting 10 people to have their genomes sequenced. So the project was founded in 2005, and it's dedicated to creating public genome health and trait data. So the transparency of this project is one of its core traits. George Church is very much about having information be available to the public and not keeping information from them or keeping things private, being very transparent. So by allowing for people to publicly share their own personal data to build this database, that's kind of how it happens. And information available online to the public domain does not cease at the genetic level, but rather includes medical and personal information. So it really is a big decision to join this project because you really are giving up a lot of privacy. But the aim of the project is to provide public data for scientific progress And this project was the pilot project of the Personal Genome Project network, and George Church launched it again 2005 at Harvard Medical School, and has since grown to include many leading institutions around the globe. So it really, this book takes you through the beginnings, how it started, and being a participant, having that, seeing the experience through the author's eyes of being one of the first 10 participants, and kind of everything he goes through. And he comments a lot of how personalized medicine began. So much of this history of personalized genomics, he investigates the startup companies 23andMe, DecodeMe, and Navigenics. He brings the reader through the beginnings of these companies, all starting in 2007, which is interesting that they all started at this time and really popped up then, and the issues they experienced as they grew, because the companies all started at the same time. They experienced similar issues at similar times. And he raises noteworthy issues within personalized medicine and laws that have attempted to combat these complex issues. And this commentary explores the future possibilities and conflicts that personalized medicine could bring to the healthcare industry, and specifically to the patient experience. He really focuses on the patient experience and brings it down from that large grand scale of healthcare down to the patient and the issues that they may experience on a personal level. Informed consent is one of the main focuses of the PGP, and as the project is committed to ensuring that their participants are clearly informed about what being a participant involves. So as I've said, privacy is a huge part that they're giving up, but there's more than that. And in order to make a decision on this, you really need to have a good level of education on these issues to make an educated decision. So Misha Angist, for example, is very much educated in the field of genetics with a PhD in genetics and a master's degree in genetic counseling. So even though he has an extensive background in genetics, he still had to explore the benefits and consequences in taking part of this study. So it's definitely not an easy issue, even for the experts of the field. So it's something that if you're interested in joining or interested in learning about it, you really definitely have to look at all of the repercussions of that. And it just highlights how he has 2 degrees in genetics, but that controversy of deciding whether to do it or not shows how controversial and intricate the issues are. And he brought up these issues to his wife when he first thought of joining, and they shared multiple concerns, and he kind of hashes it out in the book. They talked through email, I guess, because they were both very busy, and throughout, I guess, a span of a day or two, they have emails going back and forth, and he includes that in the text, which is really cool, and a very inside look into just kind of his experience throughout this. And one of the issues they had was that the possible future discrimination. So if companies could look up Angist's information, then he could be punished for having a predisposition for a lethal disease. A hiring manager may not hire him based on this predisposition, as it costs the company too much money and employee health insurance and a loss in investing him training for the job. So if you see, for instance, that he has a really high risk for heart disease, then you may say, maybe we won't hire him because that's a little bit of a risk. Let's go with someone that doesn't have as much of a risk. So that's genetic discrimination. And there are laws against this, but it's still a concern. And insurance companies may also raise the cost of life insurance or deny coverage altogether. That's something that he was concerned of during this thought process. And he was making these decisions prior to GINA. And this is before GINA was an active piece of legislation. So I'll take a minute to explain what GINA is. So GINA stands for the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And after 12 years in the making, it was passed in May 2008 and in both houses of Congress and signed by President George Bush. And GINA protects individuals from employee and health insurance. However, its protection ends there. GINA does not protect against life, disability, or long-term care insurance. So the consequences he was considering, and that him and his wife were considering, of being hired and health insurance those were issues that they were considering because GINA was not yet in effect, because it was before May 2008. But now we have GINA, which protects individuals from genetic non-discrimination of employee and health insurance, but it does not protect against life, disability, or long-term care insurance. So those are still issues we have today. Another concern that him and his wife had was for their daughters. Not only would Angist's genetic information be public, but so would half of both of his daughters' genetic information, as half their genetic information was inherited from him. So the list of family members grows out from there. So it's not just his sibling, it's not just his offspring, but it's also his siblings. If he had a genetic variant correlated with the disease, it increases other family members' risk for having the same genetic variant that would increase their risk for that disease. So it's not just deciding that you're going to look at your own information, but you're really opening up a lot of doors for multiple family members that may not want to know. And if they know you have something, then they know it increases their risk, and they might not want to know that either. So it's really a family decision as opposed to just an individual decision. And having this information be public is very difficult for family members, again, that don't want to know their genetic risks. And they may be faced with getting genetic testing done themselves. And for him personally, breast cancer was something that ran in his family. So he had to have a conversation with his wife saying that if he tested positive for a BRCA gene variant, they would have to decide when they were going to tell their daughters, and when they would, if and when they would like to have them have genetic testing to see if they inherited it. Because if he had the BRCA, either BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation, gene variant, then his daughters would have a 50% chance of inheriting that. And having the BRCA1 or 2 gene variant means that you have an increased risk of developing breast cancer, even for males, but obviously more so for females. So when it comes to this genetic information being available to the public, some of the consequences kind of seem like they're from a science fiction plot. One of them is a quote, I'm quoting here, anyone with sufficient knowledge to take your genome and use it to make synthetic DNA and plant it at a crime scene, which you can do that. So that is a risk that he took when joining this. And also being aware of one's genetic information can have major emotional impacts as well, both positive and negative. Results from the sequencing could reveal genetic variants be correlated with genetic diseases, as mentioned earlier, or an absence of these genetic variants. The anxiety and stress while waiting for these results can also build and be something that people really don't think about when they think about genetic testing, but usually you have a couple weeks there before you get results back. It may be different in terms of this because they're not just looking at one variant, they're looking at the entire genome. But on a general level, this is something that may not be considered by people, but it can be a very emotionally heavy situation to deal with. And he even admits that he felt some angst when he first looked at his genetic information, kind of having that weight and really thinking about it a lot. So in November 2007, 23andMe launched only a few days after DecodeMe. And both of these companies offered what Angist refers to as the variome. Now, the variome looks at specific markers in people's genomes to gain insight into specific genetic predispositions one may have and the associated risks for developing these diseases correlated with the genetic variants. These markers are known as single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, and only represent, get this, 0.05% of the genome. They only represent 0.05% of the genome. So this is one of the issues with 23andMe and DecodeMe's services. It only provides a very, very small, minute glimpse into one's genome, which customers may not be aware of. Another major issue with this is how reliable they are. The regulations of SNPs that are studied is not tightly regulated as people may believe. So for an SNP to be added to the gene journal, the list of SNPs a company tests for, the trait has to be studied in at least 1,000 people, been independently replicated in another study, and been reported in a reputable peer-reviewed journal. So those are the 3 requirements: to have been studied in 1,000 people, independently replicated in another study, and reported in a reputable peer-reviewed journal. Now, some of the SNPs that are testing for have only been studied in subpopulations, such as a few prostate cancer risk alleles, which had only been studied in African Americans. Now, this is not reliable, as ethnicity can be a factor in traits, and these traits may also not be reliably tested, as they may not have tested extensively. And this is where the gap exists. So consumers may not be fully informed of these issues, and therefore their consent is not informed consent, because they don't understand that a lot of these SNPs that are being tested for, if the consumer sends in a DNA swab to a company such as 23andMe and DecodeMe at this time, granted things have changed since, but at this time, if they sent in their sample and they get back results that maybe they have an increased risk for, say, arthritis, that may not be very scientifically backed if there was, only a couple studies of that subpopulation, if they're not in that subpopulation, and there's nothing that the consumers are consuming that is giving them this information that, hey, we're not really completely sure, like, we're not 100% sure. Well, we're never 100% sure, but we don't know how much of this is really true, as opposed to some of the other SNPs. So great variation with this, and not really reliable results. So one of the jobs of genetic counselors is to explain to patients and customers the results of their genetic tests, as well as exploring options for further testing and treatments, etc. Now, in the field of genetic counseling, being unbiased is a very key skill and vital when dealing with customers and patients, because in the field, being unbiased is necessary, because you don't want to sway your patient either way of deciding. They need to make that decision on their own. You're just representing the facts and helping them understand in their education, and seeing helping them to their next steps if they decide to go further with genetic testing or something of that. Now, genetic counselors educate their patients without revealing their own personal beliefs, and Angist challenges this because he thinks that genetic counselors, just like many doctors, should be allowed to provide their own opinions to patients. In the medical field, it's common for patients to ask doctors, like, what would you do in this situation, or what would you do if this was your child? What treatment or operation would they pursue? But in genetic counseling, this personal sharing is seen as unethical, and you really are not supposed to do it in the field. And he disagrees that this discrepancy between professions is vital. In cases where doctors may be providing their own personal view, it's not a controversial issue that people aren't like, well, the doctor said I should probably do this, and that's unethical. Like, you really don't hear people bring that up as an issue. It's kind of something that is accepted in our society. In the cases that genetic counselors are being resourced, the issues are almost always viewed as controversial, and therefore their own personal beliefs should not be shared with patients. But, maybe we should take a look at this and say, should they be? Or maybe it's really not a good idea, and there is a lot of good reasons why the unbiased is part of being a genetic counselor. But Angist really, and he has a master's in genetic counseling, so he's definitely an expert in this field. But he's really challenging this and saying that it really shouldn't be that way. But he has mixed feelings around having one's genome sequenced. Obviously, he went with it, and he shared his experience. But he admits that having your genome sequenced is not for some people, and having this public information is certainly not for everyone, because you can have your genome sequenced and not have it public information. It doesn't have to go together. But he's kind of taking the two issues and saying that it's for some people and it's not for some people. And it's clear the intent of writing this book was to educate people on what personalized medicine is and how science is advancing in this area of healthcare, because, it's even in the title, At the Dawn of Personal Genomics. But beyond this understanding, Angist wants to provide people that are curious about having their own genetic sequence done an inside look of how he experienced it. This book is not all about the science. It's not all about the facts and like how it works. It's really a human experience that you get to experience through him. And he exposes his audience to the ethical issues surrounding having one's genome be sequenced, and he is biased as he made the decision to have his own genome sequenced. However, the book, he shares his thought process while debating whether he should take part in PGB and expose his sequenced genome to the public. And he provides commentary on the reasons of having one's genome sequenced, reasons against having his own genome sequenced, which softens his bias. But he really, he kind of just shares all of his thoughts so someone that's going through the same thing can kind of see this as a resource to help them maybe decide. And I really think he presents his experience in a real, genuine fashion in this book, and provides his readers with a better understanding of the controversial issues surrounding having one's genome sequenced and what we should be aware of for the future of personalized medicine, especially as this area of medicine comes down to having patients' genomes sequenced, and just all of the issues that comes with that, and kind of just igniting that conversation and having it continue, because personalized medicine is something that is very, very hot field right now in genetics. And with the personalized medicine initiative from Obama, we'll see even more now that he proposed the initiative a year ago now. It was back in January 2015. We're seeing a lot of progress and much more to come. If you want to learn more about Misha Angist, you can visit his blog at blogs.plos.org/genomeboy. To learn about the Personal Genome Project, you can go to personalgenomes.org, and there's a lot of information on there, especially if you are interested in getting involved. And I'll post these on the website, dnapodcast.com, in the show notes, so you can have links to those, as well as information about the book if you're interested in reading that. I highly suggest it. It was a great read, and definitely learned a lot from it. So that wraps up today's episode of DNA Today. You can tune in next week, Monday at 11:30 a.m. on WHUS.org or 91.7 FM to learn more about genetics. If you're on Twitter, at DNA Podcast is where I am. And if you have questions that you want to send in, comments, anything related to the show that you want to send to me directly, and it may be longer than 140 characters, you can email me at info@dnapodcast.com. So thanks for listening, and join me next week, again Monday at 11:30 a.m. to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.
How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made